I'm so glad that the Harrises are on the front row again. Right, Lisa? Yeah. Oh, she hates it. Anyway, so it's a bit of a joke, but it always makes me feel warm to have someone right in front of me, like everybody keeps backing off from me. So that's good. Good seeing everybody. We were just gone to California for a few weeks, and last Sunday I was watching you online, sitting eating my breakfast early in the morning in California and drinking my coffee. And I was listening to Caleb share. If you hadn't heard that, you need to make sure you go back and listen to it because he talks a lot about some updates on our church that are important. He made a couple statements, and I thought, I'm just going to give, what I wanted to do is after he made certain statements, I wanted to know what the reaction was. I wanted them to turn the camera around and say, how was the reaction, right? But I couldn't do that. So if you have reactions, tell me afterwards. I want to hear all your reactions to what Caleb said last week, if you haven't told me that. And then, but what I remember, one thing that stood out to me, a couple things I just want to give a couple commentaries on. He says, we are no longer operating as a senior pastor-led church. You know, we've been heading this direction for a long time, even before I was even thinking about retirement, even before COVID. And the last year, though, we've actually been trying it on and operating that way. And also for me, I get to be a part of the preaching planning team, the teaching and planning team. So I actually do that as well there. And so it's interesting, after I listened to Caleb, I wanted to talk to somebody and process. And so I happened to be staying with the pastor of Palo Alto, one of the pastors of Palo Alto, and you're a good friend of mine named Ron. And we went on this massive long walk, and we just talked, and he just asked me all kinds of questions. And they were such good questions, I'm going to let you in on a couple of the highlights of those questions. One thing he was just talking about in this conversation, he was talking about, well, what were you doing as a senior pastor? Weren't you pursuing God? And I thought, oh yeah, I was. I was pursuing God's will as a senior pastor-led church. And I said, and so he goes, well, like, what's the difference, And so as we were talking about it, I began, talking about, well, God led us. I mean, we've been doing this for 26 years, senior pastor, and God's always in that, and I'm always pursuing the will of God, at best I know how, with good counsel. We have a great counsel, and we have a team, and I've always had more and more of a team around me, so he's thinking, like, well, what's the difference? I mean, you have a team around you, and I said, well, it's a lot different. And so as I talked about it, I started explaining to him, like, the difference in how it feels. And so he was asking me, like, well, for you, from your side, what's it like? Because you're making a big shift here on how these things are going. And I thought that was really interesting. So I had to really think about that. And I said, well, at first it was harder, quite a bit harder, because it was so much more vulnerable. It was so much more about me saying my heart more, not holding things back. And that was harder for me to do in this group because I've been operating this way, right? And I said, but really though, once I got past some of that hardness of it, because I've been doing this for 26 years differently, it was better, And I said, what do you mean by that? He says, well, I felt like this, it was less on me and even the group, and it was more on Jesus. It was like, it took the responsibility. We slowed down and we made sure we were putting the responsibility to lead us on Jesus. And he goes, well, describe how that might look like. And I said, well, it's like, a lot less brainstorming, a lot more praying, a lot more slowing down and listening to both to God and one another together. And that was different than a team. That's why it was different than a team. And so, and I also said, and he said, well, how's it going? And I said, well, so far, I don't know, we're new in this. It's so far so good, because as we've been trying to learn how to lead a church in this way, the best way I describe it is the fruit has been different. It's not like we're making lots of decisions. Mostly it's about God working in us. But those conversations, I used to come out of meetings a little tired and exhausted from the dings you have as you interact, and and now I come out feeling like, oh, we've connected to Jesus, and it gives me this connection where by that vulnerability, I'm actually transformed by meetings, not deformed by meetings, right? So that's a couple things I would just say. That's what we know so far. It's all pretty new. But I want to say to you, make sure that we want you to ask questions and make sure you feel comfortable in asking me. I would love to know your reaction to that statement, that we're no longer a senior pastor of church, like, yay, or like, oh, I don't know what I think about that, but talk to me about it, because I didn't have a chance last week to be here. And the second one is more tied into what we're moving towards in our series right now. And I want to say, last week, I wanted to give you an update too, is last week, as soon as I flew in, the next 2 days, we were meeting with David Hughes. And David Hughes he's been a gift to us because he's been a practicing senior pastor for many, many years, and he's turned over his church, he's still in his church, and he's very well trained in a place of teaching people how do you do this as a group. And he's like, I would say if you find someone in the sage category, it's not very often. I would say he's in the sage category. So us being around him all this time, he was so helpful and affirming and showing the things, and it was just really good. So what I want to say to you guys, those of you who prayed for us, which some of you didn't, but some of you did, thank you for that. And those who thought they should pray for us and didn't, somehow God will use that too. All right? So thanks for that. So a couple things. The next statement that Caleb made that is going to lead into our teaching is that he said, God's showing us a new way of doing church. And that is going to be something that we'll be helping you understand and kind of fleshing out over the next few months more and more. But what I would say in that statement is that, what we mean by that is really you can get a hint by some of the things we're already doing in our series. If you've noticed, if you've been around here, we have been speaking about, we had 1 John, and now we're moving into this place of loving one another. And even before that, you'd hear us talk a lot about we are not an I, we're a we, and all this kind of things. Those are just things bubbling up. There's just been a lot of things going on in this area because we're going to be talking about us, our community, and what it means to be community. You may not know this. Our name is Vineyard, and we have a blank church. Community. And the reason we put that in there because there's no other word that we could come up with as we prayed about it. From the very beginning, we said it should be a community. But then when people hear community, right, they have many different views of what we mean by community, right? It can be, I remember I was in this, early on we were planting the church. I remember I went to this coffee shop and this gal comes up to me and she's kind of this earthy gal. She goes, I recognize you. I went to a church at a school. You're kind of laid back, nice California church. And I thought, oh. So her idea of community was somehow, I didn't think of myself as a Californian, even though I was there for a while, but somehow that vibe got through, right? So there's a vibe about community, what that looks like. Other people's like, oh, well, that means you're not programmatic, which we're not. We're all relational. We're friendly, or we're nice, right? That's going to be all the community. But when we're talking about community, and what we're talking about in this series is community is way beyond that. It's something that we see from the book of Acts on, and it's radically different. And it's the way God reaches the world through his body. It's this place of having people just like you who are very different from one another, who have connected to Jesus, coming together and being a body and learning how to keep listening to the head, Jesus, and how to listen through, not by yourself, but as a community, right? And that's what we see all the way through Scripture. And that's just what we want more of when we say we want to do a new way of church. It's not like we're changing who we are as a church, our values. It's saying this is what we want to see more of. And so this series is, we talked about this place in John when we were back. And 1 John, if you summarize it with one statement, how would you summarize it? Come on. We're going to have to play it up on. What? Love one another. Thank you, Bobby. You humbled yourself and said what everybody was thinking. Love one another. And that's it, right? Love one another. Right? It just, everything, if you look at all the things about, if you want to grasp who God is, if you want to understand, have God complete his love, and if you want to be transformed, all these things, you need to love one another. And so just over and over again. So now, in this series, today, we're going to be talking about how we do that. And in this series is going to be about that. And what I want to say, the very first part of this series is going to be 5 weeks that we'll be talking particularly on something that you think, how does that all relate? But it's a spot of understanding is we have to, if we love one another, the starting point is we have to see each other as equally valuable, right? If we don't have that, we can't go further. So we're going to be talking these 5 weeks like, how do we do that? How do we see each other as equally valuable, right? So, what is humility anyway? Okay, so what comes to your mind? We're family here. Like, when you think of a humble person, what comes to your mind? Just say anything. There's no right or wrong answer. Just we're getting a feel of the vibe here. So what's a humble person? What do you think of? A good listener. What's that? Thinking of yourself less. Talking of myself less. Okay. What else?
Someone who doesn't take all the credit that gives glory.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Doesn't take all the credit. Yeah. There's that don't you love humble people? Go ahead. What do you say? Oh, yeah, I was thinking that same thing. Jesus, Bill McKay, I couldn't figure out which one to go with. But yeah. So honestly, I think that's true. So, as we think about that, now on certain things, have you noticed on certain words to try to define them, it's very hard to define them without knowing the opposite. Right? This is one of those. And the opposite of humility is pride. Right? So when you think of a prideful person, what comes to your mind? Someone who's very proud. Not in a proud of my kids doing good in their school, but a proud in a place of self-raising up. What do you think about?
Someone who's never wrong.
Someone who's never wrong. That's good. What else? What?
I've met a few people like that.
Anybody else? What do you? Say it again. Loud and insecure. Yeah. And so we have these images that come to our mind, and here's what I want to say, is we have ways that we spot it places, but what we need to understand about humility and pride, it's something that we're dealing with daily. Everybody in this room is dealing with pride in some form every day of their life. And it's something that is just normal, part of our human condition. And if you look at this, what's interesting is that, pride is this place. Rich Nathan, who's the pastor of a very large church, a vineyard church in Ohio, I remember one time he talked about the most misquoted verse is 1 Timothy 6:10, and people quote it as, money is the root of all evil. That's how the quote is. And of course, that's a misquote. The quote is, the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil. Not all evil, but it's all sorts of evil, right? And what he said after this is what really got me. And I've thought about it, and I agree with it. But it was kind of shocking when he said it, because there is a root of all evil, and that is pride. And I put that to the test. Pride is the root that starts all sin, all evil, right? And humility is a solution to pride. Now, pride, there's many different definitions, but the best way I'm trying to help you understand, it's raising yourself up to what is not true, right? And some other definitions will talk about pride and talk about it as like putting oneself above another. Humility is the opposite. It's making oneself low. And by choice, not in shame or hiding, but by choice, going to a lower place. An inner lowness describes a person who depends on the Lord rather than self. It means God being God-reliant rather than self-reliant. So what I want us to get is to help us to understand how all of us deal with pride every day, and can put it down to a spot that it's not just that Debbie and I watch track sometimes. There's some really prideful track stars. I won't mention their name, but see, I want to because I want to lower them. But they are just so full of themselves. And so Debbie and I have to, and it shows me how even when I'm watching someone who's proud, how proud I get watching them and saying how terrible they are, right? This is how complicated pride is. It's everywhere, right? So I want us to understand that this is what we're all dealing with today. So I'll give you a few of my examples. I find that I notice pride in certain situations more than other situations. It's always there, but it shows up in places. Oh, there it is, in conflict. I find that is something I can kind of say, oh, it's going to be real close when I'm in conflict. With Debbie, usually. So Debbie and I are at this spot that we're like, and everything in me is raising up, right? You know that feeling? You can feel it. This thing of, I'm right, and she needs to know I'm right, and I'm going to hold down. I'm going to, all these, you just could feel it, right? And so we have this place of when we find ourselves in conflict, it promises things like you're going to be destroyed if you yield and go low. It has all kinds of things, and we can just feel it, right? You guys relate? If you don't, we'll pray for after you, prayer ministry afterwards. All right. How about this place of pride is this place where when pride's raised in me, and me and Debbie are like in a conflict. We're never in conflicts, but once in a while. I remember years ago we were in a conflict. So that's a lie. And but when that is going up like that in my mind, what happens is Debbie's beauty and the way she's made in the image of God and the way she is fully loved by God and the way she is equal with me starts diminishing. And I have such a temptation just to go a little above her or a lot above her, depending on the argument, right? I've also noticed pride is when someone mistreats me. You guys ever been mistreated? If you're in the world for any length of time, you've had some really hard things that you've gone through. You've been mistreated by different people. And this is the continuum here. Like, it can be betrayal of a friend or someone that you thought loved you and just devastating, painful, hurt. Or it could be someone who cut in front of you trying to get coffee this morning. I mean, it's a big range. And when you get to that spot, well, here's an example. It's everywhere. Like, me and Debbie are in California. We're driving down 101 down by Half Moon Bay. Beautiful day. Ocean's going. We're looking. Might be driving about 5 miles under the speed limit because I'm a tourist and I'm just looking. And the guy behind me in the truck doesn't like this. So he comes close and starts honking his horn. So I speed up a little bit to make sure I'm driving at the speed limit. But for some reason, I'm not sure what happened. I still was not going at the right speed. So I'm finding myself, you're not equal to me. That's what's happening here. And I remember I just said, I'm just going to turn off, be the man of peace. So I turn off, and he lets me know with waving at me with his little finger quite vigorously how he didn't care for me. Now, at this moment, I am just a little bit rattled, and I am not saying that he didn't do anything wrong. In fact, it's real important to understand he did something wrong. You know why? Because I got to humble myself and forgive him for the thing that he did wrong, right? But I don't want to. I do not want to. So, what I'd say, too, is that, another time that pride can show up is when you're around people very different than you, who have beliefs different, political standings different, they look different, they act different, different ages, all those different things. The places are different. You can easily find yourself going to the place that you raise yourself up and lower them as well. Now, I've also found this is an easy test. The easiest place to really embrace your pride is with people you don't know. I found this out to be true, like that guy on 101. Pretty hard. I don't know this guy. I can say what I want about him. Makes no difference. He's not going to know it. Telemarketers raise my pride way up. They are not equal in this world. That's what I'm dealing with. But they are. And they're deeply loved by God. And how I respond, even that, it shows me things of what's going on inside of me. It's that person who cuts in front of you in the line in front of you, that person on social media that just drives you crazy. And you just are able, it feels like I've been holding this back and now I have a place to give it out to. That's pretty well what runs the internet, but yeah. So, and here's what I want to say. We all deal with this every day. And here's what, if you hear nothing else I say today, listen to this. Humility is the only thing that will conquer pride. Nothing else. thinking it over. Have you guys done that one? I think I'll think this over and that incident about 60,000 times in my mind, and maybe that will take care of it. Does that take care of it? No. Humility is what conquers pride. And so, and this is a central understanding of Scripture. This is all the way through Old Testament and New Testament. Jesus, the full representation of God, God in the flesh, was considered humble and lowly. He humbled himself. In Philippians it said he did not grasp his divinity, but he made himself low as a servant because he knew that's where he should be as a human, and that's how he showed us. The other thing I would say is it's not only just, he actually, when he invites us into a place with him, he says, take my yoke on you, and here's how he describes, here's why you want to do that, and learn from me. Why? Because I am gentle and lowly in heart. You need someone to teach you how to go low. We see such strong statements about exalting yourself that you will be humbled if you do. But if those who humble, they will be exalted. It talks in Proverbs about taking delight in those who are humble and giving them the crown of victory. How about Ephesians covers it pretty closely. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And the verse that I want us to look at is 1 Peter 5:5. This is just a very great verse. All of you, clothe yourself with humility towards one another because God opposes the proud, but shows favor to the humble. It's so straightforward, but don't overlook how clearly it's saying this. First off, it's all of you. It's not a few of you. It's everyone who knows Jesus, this is what you must do. And you notice that it talks about this place of clothing yourself. You know, it's an action that you can do. You can clothe yourself with humility. I think that's such a good imagery because as our pride and our old self is rising up, we understand the only way to get rid of it is to clothe ourselves with what is true, which in the right way is the humility. As we take that, it's like, and the other thing as you look at this is like, and then it is a strong statement that God opposes the proud and shows favor to the humble. And I just want to say, I've been in this a long time, and I've had seasons in my life that I was drifting from God and people. I could feel it happening. And I got irritable and cynical. Now, don't get me wrong. There are seasons in your life when you are humble and seeking God that are dark nights of the soul. There's seasons that are really hard. There's seasons that are dry. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is, what I realize now when I pay attention to this. By the way, this is an amazing tip. If you just believe this, it'll change your life. Whenever the church starts becoming a joke, and you don't care about being around Christians, usually it's pride. It's got you. And when you don't feel like you can go to God, those are things that many times it's just pride. And so when that happens, it's like, oh, good. I can know this because now I can just do what? What do you do with pride? You humble yourself. Now, and then God shows you favor. I mean, humility is like, oh, I need to be humble, like it's a bad thing, hard, tough, take the bad end of the stick. It's like, that's how we think of humility. Humility is the most beautiful, empowering thing around. It's the place that brings you freedom. I mean, think about this. If you want to get God exalting you, if you want to have him crown you with victory and give you rest, you want him to transform you, and it comes through that process of humility. So I'm going to have Chris Reif come up because I like him better than me on reading things. And I want to have him read a story. Now that you guys all know what pride is, what I want you to do as Chris is reading, I want you to pay attention to where you see pride in this pretty well-known story.
Thanks. Genesis 37, verse 1 through 11. Jacob lived in the land where his father had stayed, the land of Canaan. This is the account of Jacob's family line. Joseph, a young man of 17, was tending the flocks with his brothers, the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And he brought their father a bad report about them. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his other sons because he had been born to him in his old age, and he made an ornate robe for him. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them, they hated him and could not speak a kind word to him. Joseph had a dream, and when he told it to his brothers, they hated him all the more. He said to them, "Listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field, when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright, while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it." His brothers said to him, "Do you intend to reign over us? Will you actually rule us?" And they hated him all the more because of his dream and what he had said. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream, and this time the sun and moon and 11 stars were bowing down to me." When he told his father as well as his brothers, his father rebuked him and said, "What is this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you?" His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind.
You know, this is a familiar story, but what I want you to do, I'm not sure why my thing can't see it, but I think it's somehow it's not right. But anyway, one thing I'd say in this is that I want you to look through and just, where do you see pride coming in? Who are the bad guys in this story? Because I've had this taught to me many times. There's the bad guys. The brothers are the bad guys, you know? But do you understand, in every person here, they made choices out of pride, where they found themselves having these things that are going on and somehow putting themselves in a different place and not treating one another as actually equal in God's eyes. Do you understand? When God looks at us, he has love fully for Bobby, the same degree as me. For anybody in this room, the same degree. There's not a bit of difference. That's how much he loves him. That's how he values every person. And fill in the blank to whatever person you want. And so in this situation, what we see is Jacob, which is referred to as Israel. Jacob loved Joseph more than any of his other sons. And now the thing about it is, maybe he had a preference, a warmth because of this particular having a son in his old age. It's a preference. But he went way beyond a preference. Oh, I think I'll make a robe just to declare that among all my kids, and I'll give them this amazing robe, and I'll just let them prance around with what they already thought, you know, they're already concerned about. Now I'm going to seal the deal and tell them he's my favorite son. It was very obvious. Do you understand that choice and the impact that it made in that family with his own children? Right? And then we see Joseph, who was 17. I guess we give him a break, but 17 back there as an adult. So yeah, he shouldn't have. He listened to this dream. And so when he has this dream, now what's interesting here, the dream, prophetic, there's lots of God speaking to him through that dream, dramatically, but he goes around and says, "I had a dream. And let me explain it to you. There's these sheaves, and that was me, and all my people stood up, and you all bowed down." He starts explaining how they bowed down to him. And you can imagine, as he's saying that with his Technicolor coat on, right, how that felt, and the damage and the anger that ensued, which again raised pride, in his brothers. And so his older brothers, they were already at a point that they couldn't speak a kind word about him. And now he comes to visit them in this coat and saying, "Listen to this dream I had. And by the way, the last one was only the starter. It's going to go bigger and more. Everybody's going to bow down to me. The moon and the stars." Okay. So here's the thing about it. We see from that the desolation of that family until God redeemed it later. We see brother against their brother. We see them selling him into slavery, lying to their father that he was dead. If you just think dysfunction, think about all that. But here's what happened, is humility would have conquered this, right? We have to understand, as a church, if we want to do church at a new way, we just got to look at, it says it right in 1 John, it says we got to love each other. But if we don't see each other as equal, and we don't have the humility to do that, we're in trouble. Now, one thing I want to say in this is, though, we had a good discussion, and this is why it's good to have a group. We had a really good discussion in this whole place of our teaching and planning team about what's the difference between preference and favoritism, right? Because preference is very different than favoritism. Preference is liking one thing or person more than another. Do you think I like my wife better than some of you? You are correct. Do you think I prioritize my family more than I prioritize your family? Yes. Do you think that I have lots of relationships, and we all have lots of relationships with one another that are very different, and how those relationships have? We have over 200 people who call this their church, but you're limited in who you have. You have lots of different things going on, right? So preferences are not sin, right? Even, I guess, he's being honest. I prefer, Joseph. Maybe it's not right or wrong, but at least he's honest about it, right? But the thing about this is the difference is favoritism. Here's the thing is, Ben McCall loves baseball. I don't care. It's not my preference of sports, right? It's his preference of sports. We can just go on and on of the different things, right? But, if somehow that preference turns to a place that I don't want to be around Ben McCall, we got a problem, right? But that's a very simple example, but it's a place in which that we evaluate people and we have preferences, and then we just go stay in the areas we have preferences are, and to the point that we end up hurting another. So preference is not a sin. Favoritism is the act of giving preference unfairly to a person or a group at the expense of another. And that's very different. This place that you can have different preferences and that's what the body of Christ has, lots of different preferences, but the place of that you all of a sudden say, at the expense of another, it brings harm to the other. Because the true view of it, whether your preferences are, is we are all equal. And God loves us all equally. And we are all made in God's image. And that's how God sees it. And when we don't see it that way, it causes great harm. Now, so favoritism is this place that we allow our preferences to cause us to see one another as less valuable. Now, we do that so Christian. Don't get me wrong. It's not like, I'm not like, oh man, I'm in the parking lot, they're talking bad about me again, or this other person talking about it. We're so good about being nice. But you can be nice in a church and have lots of favoritism in a church. Right? That's why you look at Jesus and what you see, because he was lowly. He was accessible to all people and deeply loved all people. Because what God is doing is when we get down there, when we live at that spot, that's how he'll build our community to what he wants, is that anchor of humility, of understanding that we are not above anyone. All right. Two statements, and we're going to close. These two statements, I'm just going to read them, take them in. Knowing that God loves me and everyone else fully and unconditionally is essential for having a truly humble view of myself, and it gives me the ability to love one another. That is what we keep humbling ourselves, because when we get there, it gives us the understanding of how God sees us and how he sees others. And that gives us the capacity for us to love people in a way we couldn't have before. Second thing, Humility towards one another allows us to be vulnerable and experience God's love and transformation. And take this in. Change is not possible without humility towards God and one another, because God opposes the proud. It will not work. And so the good news in that, not saying it's easy, but it is straightforward. God needs to show me how is it that I live and choose to clothe myself with humility and be able to see people and act towards people as God sees them. All right? So, we're going to do an exercise, and after that, we'll have the worship team come up. We're going to give 2 minutes for this. So it'll be 2 minutes of silence. You can hang in there for 2 minutes of silence after I say this. I want you to ask God these 2 questions, and I want you to just listen to him. He doesn't overwhelm you. He'll tell you, he doesn't you have the whole world to work with here. He'll give you particular things, but it all depends on if you humble yourself. So I encourage you to practice the humility, and then the 2 questions are there people or a group of people that I view as less valuable than myself? The second question is, are there relationships where I have allowed my preferences to become favoritism and drive my life instead of God's love?